Okay, so how do you get your first client in your management consulting firm? Maybe you're just starting out, been going a little while. How do you get those clients? Coming right up. So one of the biggest challenges when you first go out as a management consulting and starting up your own management consulting firm is getting clients. Without clients coming in the door, there's no cash flow, you're dead in the water. So that is your number one priority in those early years and months. And not just getting clients in, but building client relationships, because the success of any management consulting company is largely down to the client retention. Building really close, valuable relationships with clients who will have an ongoing need for your services. And typically here in one of my consulting businesses, Logistics Bureau, with our major clients, we've probably been working with them for 10 or 11 years on average. So it's really about providing great service and having a great relationship. But how do you start off? Well, I may in a later video tell a story. No, in fact, I'll tell it this time. It's really quite funny. I'll keep it for the end. So how do you get your, I'll just make a note to tell that one. How do you get your first consulting clients? Well, depending on your background, you may be coming out of a corporate, maybe you've had a couple of jobs already. Sometimes the easiest way to get your first client is actually from your previous employer. So maybe you worked in a particular area in IT or marketing or whatever it might be, an area where it would make sense for them to get some consulting expertise. Maybe it's a little bit more like contracting in the early days, and I'll stick a link up here to a video that talks about contractor versus consultant. They are slightly different. But in the early days, it's about getting some cash flow into your business. So don't get too hung up about whether you're being a consultant or a contractor. So previous employers is a good option. Networking. Now, networking is pretty easy these days. When I started out in my first consulting business in 1997, networking was bloody hard. You'd have to go along to, evening networking drinks. Oh, I hate that stuff. I hate making small talk at cocktail parties. But now it's a lot easier, because just think for a moment about the networking that you could do. Now, the best way to think about this is, who is your ideal client? And if you've never heard of the term customer or client avatar, maybe I'll do another video on that. In fact, I'll just make a note to do that. And a client avatar is basically the profile of your ideal client. So for example, whatever it is you do, narrow it down to the industry, the type of role, the sort of age group, what's your perfect client look like? And then ask yourself, where do they hang out? And that could be offline or online. So in most industries, there are going to be industry groups that meet and have seminars and talks and breakfast meetings and all that kind of stuff. Every industry has them, so get along to those. That's certainly a really good first step. But a tip with networking, don't be that person in the room that everyone hates because you're pushing your business card at people and trying to get a sale. That's just really tacky. That's like going to a family barbecue and trying to sell them Amway or something, You've got to be way more subtle. It's about just building relationships and getting to know more people in the industry. There's what's the latest research now on the number of touches that you need with a potential client before they become your client, and it's something like 20. So networking is just about creating awareness, making sure they know who you are, and maybe you'll see these people a number of times at different networking events. You get to know them, get to know what their business is, what some of their problems are, and then when the time's appropriate, you might say, oh, I could help with that. Do you want to have a coffee sometime? That's what, live networking is about. Just don't be pushy. I put a video together on just what I think of that, on what to call your management consulting business. So we'll stick a link above to that one. The reason I say that is to make sure you've always got lots of business cards with you for physical networking. We've just recently had some, I've got some here, remade, which are really cool. I used to have some old style business cards. These ones now just have my sort of name and contact details, and it's got 4 of my main businesses on the back of it. But in the early days, I'm fairly well known in my industry. In the early days, you probably want a business card that kind of says what you do. You know, it might have your why or your vision and mission or something like that, because, you know, when people look at this later, they're going to go, oh, Rob O'Byrne, CEO, you know, kind of what does he do? I've got my business names on the back, but like I say, I'm pretty well known in the industry, so they kind of know who I am. When you're starting out, people don't know. So networking. Make sure you're giving out lots of business cards, nice quality business cards, something on there that kind of indicates what you do. So that's the physical networking. Industry groups, meetups, you know, there's all kind of stuff that you can join. Then there is online networking. So where does your perfect client hang out online? Is it in LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups? I've met some amazing clients and built some amazing relationships through online groups like that. I'm talking to a guy in the US at the moment about doing some joint seminars and things like that. I met him on LinkedIn. I'm talking to a lady in Canada about doing some collaborative work. I met her in a Facebook group. So, you know, those are really powerful. But again, make sure that you're using the right etiquette. Don't jump in there and push your stuff. Always the best way to engage with people when networking is to give before you get. So help people out, you know, answering questions, giving some tips. That's all I do. I don't try and sell stuff on online networking groups, but I make connections and then we'll have a chat offline. So try to be helpful. You know, you want to be that person at the networking group that people go, oh, it's really great to meet you this evening. You know, could we catch up for a coffee? You haven't been pushing your stuff on them, but you are sharing some knowledge, sharing some information, and they want to hear more from you. So networking is really important. What have we talked about? Previous employers, networking, industry groups, and of course marketing. So marketing is so much easier now. When I started way back in '97, I don't think many people even had websites. So yeah, believe it or not, we had Yellow Pages adverts. Now it's so much easier. But you can waste a lot of money with online promotion. So I would say, you know, right at the outset, get yourself a nice professional looking website. Make sure that you have a blog on that website and that you're updating that at least weekly. Make sure that you're on things like LinkedIn and that you're active on that, commenting, engaging. Make sure that you're posting once or twice a week. And don't forget to publish LinkedIn articles as well, so it's longer content. You've got to start building your presence so that people know who you are and what you're about. And then we could do a whole video on making sure that your LinkedIn profile is right. Maybe we will. Okay. Oh yeah. I was going to tell you that story about where my first client came from. I've just got a note. So here I was, right at the beginning of starting my consulting business, and I didn't have a client. And I had recently left another consulting business here in Australia, and funnily enough, it was about 8 years later I bought that one. But I just left, and so I didn't have any clients and kind of wondering where my first client was going to come from. And this guy rang me. So I'm in Sydney, this guy rings me from Melbourne, and he says, look, I've got to go on assignment to China for 2 months. There's this little project, someone needs someone to have a look at their, I consult in logistics, someone needs somebody to come along, have a look at their warehousing contracts and make sure it's all okay. He said, look, I'm sorry, I already quoted them $5,000, so that's the budget, but I can't do it. So I said, yeah, that's fine. And I went along, and it was basically for a third-party logistics company auditing their contract to see how they could improve performance and minimise cost. So, you know, my very first consulting project was with this logistics company, and it was a $5,000 project. I met that guy some years later. We were actually hosting a breakfast seminar. I think it was at least 10 or 15 years later. And I pulled him aside and I said, look, I've never told you this before, but you know that lead that you gave me when you had to go to China for 2 months? You know, oh yeah, I remember that. It was like $5,000 or something, wasn't it? I said, yeah, do you know how much I billed that client by the end of the year? And he went, no, what was that? And his jaw dropped when I told him $425,000. That was in the first year with one client. And that really, you know, got my consulting business off the ground to a great head start. So there's another lesson in that. When you get that first client, love them to death. You know, bend over backwards. It's so important in the early months and years. In fact, you know, it should always be important. You should always be delivering outstanding service. But particularly early on, you want that client to come back to you. And again, you're not pushing, you're just delivering great work, you're building a great relationship with that client. I had to bring other people into my business to help me service that client. And that's the topic of another video. When do you bring on additional staff so it's not just you? So there we go. Where do you get your very first clients? It's networking, it's going to your older employers, it's getting out there doing a little bit of marketing. And as soon as you get that first one, love them to death because they're like gold. And you don't want to lose a client, You want to build that client into one of your first major clients and be working with them for years, hopefully. Okay, so if that was of interest, do like, share, do comment below. I'd love to hear, your success stories about getting your first client, or if you've got any questions about how to get your first client, I'll make sure I answer those. If you're not subscribed, you're mad, hit the subscribe button. I say you're mad because I'm going to unload everything that I've learned over 23 years of consulting here on this channel. And people say, why do I do that? Well, why not? I've kind of made it. I've got 3 very successful consulting businesses. Why not? It's time to give back and help you guys who are just starting out. So hit subscribe, hit the bell. That way you get notified every time a new video comes out, and they come out on a Wednesday. See you then.